as my heir, William now assumes the Scottish titles which have meant so much to me.
The palace walls have seen many secrets over the centuries, but nothing quite like this. In the early hours of the morning, while London slept and royal lights quietly dimmed, a decision was made that could change the monarchy forever. King Charles, a man who waited his entire life for the crown, is now at the center of a storm no one saw coming. According to whispers spreading rapidly through royal circles, a confidential abdication order was quietly signed behind closed doors. No press announcement, no public statement, just silence and shock. Those closest to the king were reportedly left stunned. Senior aides frozen. Palace staff instructed to stay silent. And behind it all, one reaction shook the corridors more than any other: Queen Camilla's fury. Sources claim she was blindsided, discovering the decision only after it had already been prepared. Her reaction? Emotional, explosive, uncontainable. For years, Camilla stood firmly beside Charles, enduring public pressure, criticism, and sacrifice. But now, insiders say this moment feels like betrayal, not just of the crown, but of her personally. What pushed the king to consider stepping away so suddenly? Was it health, pressure, or something far more personal that the palace has worked desperately to hide? And why are senior royals reportedly scrambling behind the scenes, fearing this secret may soon become impossible to contain? Because if this order is real, everything about the monarchy's future could change overnight. The silence inside Buckingham Palace that morning felt heavier than usual. Not the peaceful kind, but the kind that presses against the walls, as if something irreversible has already happened. Staff moved carefully, speaking in hushed tones, their eyes avoiding one another. Something was wrong. Very wrong. At the center of it all stood King Charles, a man who waited more than 7 decades for the crown, now facing a moment few could ever imagine. According to sources close to the palace, a document had been quietly prepared, one that carried consequences far beyond personal choice. It was an abdication order. Not announced. Not explained. Simply signed. Those closest to the king were reportedly stunned. Some believed it was a mistake. Others feared it was the result of months of silent pressure, emotional exhaustion, and deeply private struggles the public has never been allowed to see. What made the moment even more unsettling was the secrecy surrounding it. No official briefing, no reassurance, only confusion spreading through the palace like a quiet storm. For King Charles, the weight of the crown had never been light. From the moment he was a young boy, the world watched, judged, and waited. His entire life became preparation, not for freedom, but for duty. And now, when he finally held the title he was born to inherit, something appeared to have shifted inside him. Insiders claim the decision was not sudden. It had been forming slowly, quietly, in the background of long nights and private conversations. The strain of leadership, the emotional toll of family divisions, and the pressure of public expectation had begun to take their toll. Some aides even suggest the king had been questioning his role for far longer than anyone realized. But nothing could have prepared the palace for Queen Camilla's reaction. Sources say she was not informed in advance. When she learned of the signed order, her response was immediate and intense. Those nearby described her as shocked, deeply hurt, and struggling to understand how such a monumental decision could be made without her knowledge. For a woman who had endured decades of scrutiny to stand beside Charles, this felt like a devastating blow. Behind closed doors, voices were raised. Emotions spilled over. The calm, composed image the public associates with the Queen reportedly cracked under the weight of betrayal. To her, this was not just about the crown, it was about trust, loyalty, and the future they were meant to face together. Palace insiders say the atmosphere quickly turned tense. Advisors rushed to contain the situation, fearing word might leak before a plan could be formed. Every movement was watched. Every whisper carried weight. Even senior royals were said to be unsure how to respond. And then came the question no one wanted to ask out loud. If the king steps aside, who truly takes his place? While speculation quietly swirled, attention began turning toward Prince William. Known for his sense of duty and quiet strength, he has long been viewed as the stabilizing force within the monarchy. But those close to him say he was not prepared for such a moment. Not yet. The responsibility, arriving without warning, threatened to reshape everything. Meanwhile, Catherine remained a steady presence, offering calm where she could, though those close to her sensed concern beneath her composed exterior. She understood the gravity of what was unfolding, not just for the family, but for the entire institution. Beyond the palace walls, the public remained unaware. Life went on as usual. But inside, the monarchy stood on the edge of transformation. What pushed the king to take such a drastic step? Was it health-related, as some quietly fear? Or was it emotional exhaustion, years of family tension finally reaching a breaking point? Even more troubling was the timing. With the royal family already under intense scrutiny, this revelation threatened to reopen old wounds and deepen divisions. Trust, once fractured, is not easily restored, especially within a family that lives under the world's microscope. And yet, the most haunting question lingered in silence. Was this decision truly final? Or was it made in a moment of overwhelming emotion? As whispers grow louder and tensions rise behind palace doors, one thing is becoming painfully clear. The monarchy is standing at a crossroads unlike any it has faced before. And what happens next may change everything. As the palace struggled to contain the growing tension, the atmosphere inside became heavier with every passing hour. What had begun as a quiet internal matter was now threatening to spill beyond the gates. Phones buzzed endlessly. Advisors whispered behind closed doors. And through it all, King Charles remained unusually distant, calm on the surface, yet burdened by something far deeper. Those closest to him began to notice the change long before the alleged document surfaced. His expressions lingered longer in thought. His steps slowed. Conversations ended sooner than expected. It was as though the weight of the crown had finally pressed down in a way no one could shield him from. Insiders say the king had been reflecting deeply on legacy, not just how he would be remembered, but what kind of future he was leaving behind. The monarchy he inherited was already fragile, shaped by years of public scrutiny, internal fractures, and emotional wounds that never fully healed. And now, with every move magnified, the pressure had become relentless. Behind the scenes, private discussions grew more intense. Advisors urged caution. Some begged him to pause. Others feared that hesitation would only deepen the crisis. The palace was no longer operating as a united front. It felt divided, uncertain, and quietly afraid. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla found herself standing at the center of an emotional storm she never expected to face. For years, she had endured criticism with resilience, standing firmly beside Charles when few believed their relationship could survive the weight of public opinion. She has sacrificed privacy, comfort, and peace to support him. And now, she felt shut out of the very decision that could redefine their lives. Sources suggest she questioned not only the decision itself, but the silence surrounding it. To be excluded from such a pivotal moment cut deeply. It wasn't simply about protocol, it was about partnership. And that sense of being sidelined left a wound far deeper than the public could ever imagine. Tension between them reportedly grew palpable. Conversations became strained. Words were chosen carefully, yet carried sharp emotional weight. The palace corridors, once filled with controlled elegance, echoed with unease. Staff sensed it. Advisors feared it. Even longtime allies grew uncertain of what tomorrow might bring. As whispers intensified, attention quietly turned toward Prince William. Those close to him say he felt the shift immediately. The unspoken expectation, the unasked questions hanging in the air. The responsibility he had long prepared for suddenly felt alarmingly close. But this was not the moment he had imagined. The transition was not meant to come wrapped in secrecy and emotional upheaval. It was meant to be steady, dignified, and clear. Instead, uncertainty loomed over every interaction. Catherine, ever composed, remained a pillar of quiet strength. Yet even she could not mask the weight of what was unfolding. She understood the consequences not just for the family, but for a nation that looks to them for stability. The idea of stepping forward under such circumstances weighed heavily on her heart. Beyond palace walls, subtle signs began to emerge. Schedules shifted. Engagements were quietly adjusted. Trusted aides were seen entering and leaving at unusual hours. Observers sensed that something was unfolding, something the public had not yet been told. And still, the most unsettling question remained unanswered. Why now? Some whispered that health concerns were being carefully concealed. Others believed emotional strain had finally reached a breaking point. A few even speculated that unresolved family tensions, long buried beneath protocol, had resurfaced with devastating force. What made it all more alarming was the silence from the king himself. No reassurance, no denial, no clarity, only stillness. That silence spoke volumes. Behind closed doors, discussions reportedly turned urgent. Advisors debated contingency plans. Legal experts examined constitutional implications. Every possibility was weighed, even those once considered unthinkable. The monarchy, an institution built on continuity, suddenly found itself confronting uncertainty at its core. And as the hours passed, one truth became increasingly clear. This was no ordinary moment. It was a turning point. The question was no longer whether the situation would change, but how deeply it would reshape the future. And just when many believed the tension could not rise any higher, a new development began to unfold, one that would send shockwaves through the palace and force every royal to confront a reality they were not prepared to face, because what came next would test loyalties, expose hidden fractures, and push the monarchy closer to the edge than ever before. As the tension inside the palace reached its breaking point, a quiet shift began to unfold, one that few noticed at first, yet carried enormous consequences. Behind closed doors, trusted advisors were summoned discreetly, one by one. Their expressions alone revealed the gravity of the situation. This was no longer about speculation or rumor. Something irreversible was forming beneath the surface. King Charles, once known for his patience and steady resolve, appeared increasingly withdrawn. Those closest to him noticed moments of deep reflection, long pauses, distant gazes, and a silence that spoke louder than any announcement. It was as though he were carrying a weight too heavy to share, even with those he trusted most. Sources suggest that conversations between the king and his advisors had taken a deeply personal turn. This was no longer about duty alone. It was about identity, legacy, and the emotional toll of a lifetime lived under constant scrutiny. The crown, once a symbol of fulfillment, now seemed to represent a burden he could no longer ignore. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla found herself navigating an emotional battlefield. The sense of exclusion lingered painfully. For years, she had stood by Charles during moments of intense public criticism, offering loyalty when few others would. Yet now, when the future of their shared life hung in the balance, she felt pushed to the margins. Those close to her say the hurt ran deeper than anger. It was the quiet realization that decisions of this magnitude were unfolding without her voice. That silence cut deeply, not just as a queen, but as a partner. Inside the palace, the atmosphere grew increasingly strained. Staff members moved carefully, speaking in lowered tones, aware that even the smallest misstep could trigger consequences. Trust, once unspoken, now felt fragile. Every hallway seemed to carry tension. Every door closed just a bit too softly. Outside the palace gates, speculation intensified. Observers noted unusual changes in royal scheduling. Engagements were postponed. Meetings quietly canceled. Long-standing traditions appeared to pause without explanation. The public sensed something was wrong, even if no one could yet explain what it was. At the heart of it all stood Prince William, calm, composed, yet visibly burdened. The responsibility looming before him was not one he had expected to face so soon. Though prepared since childhood, the reality of stepping forward under such circumstances weighed heavily on him. Those close to the prince say he struggled with conflicting emotions. Duty called him forward, yet loyalty pulled him back. The idea of assuming such responsibility amid uncertainty troubled him deeply. He knew that whatever happened next would define not only his future, but the monarchy itself. Catherine remained by his side, offering quiet reassurance. Her presence was steady, but even she could not fully mask the emotional strain. She understood what this moment meant, the expectations, the scrutiny, and the personal costs that would follow. As tensions mounted, senior advisors began preparing for scenarios few had dared to imagine. Legal documents were reviewed, protocols revisited, Conversations once considered hypothetical suddenly felt urgent. Every possible outcome had to be accounted for. What unsettled many was the realization that this situation was not being driven by politics or public pressure, but by something deeply personal. The king's internal struggle had reached a point where even the institution built to support him could no longer provide answers. And still, no official word came. The silence was deafening. Within palace walls, whispers grew bolder. Some feared the monarchy was approaching a turning point that could reshape its future for generations. Others believed this moment, painful as it was, might be necessary. A reckoning long overdue. What no one could deny was the emotional weight pressing down on everyone involved. Then, in a moment that sent ripples through the entire household, a discreet meeting took place, one that would alter the course of everything. Only a small circle was present, but its implications were enormous. The tone was serious. The outcome uncertain. When it ended, those who emerged carried expressions that spoke volumes without uttering a single word. The atmosphere shifted. Something had changed. And, for the first times, it became clear that the decision looming ahead was no longer theoretical. It was approaching quickly, quietly, and with consequences that could not be undone. As night fell over the palace, a heavy stillness settled in. The kind that comes before history turns a page. The question now was no longer if the monarchy would face a reckoning, but how soon, and at what cost. And as dawn approached, one truth stood undeniable. The next step would shake the foundation of everything the royal family thought they understood about power, loyalty, and legacy. As dawn quietly broke over the palace, the silence felt heavier than ever before. It was the kind of silence that follows a storm, when everything appears calm, yet nothing is truly settled. Inside those historic walls, the weight of unspoken truths pressed down on everyone who walked the corridors. The meeting held the night before had changed everything. Those present left with faces drained of color, movements careful and restrained. No one spoke openly, but the message was clear. The monarchy was standing on the edge of transformation. What had once felt distant was now frighteningly real. King Charles remained in his private chambers, alone with thoughts that had clearly consumed him for weeks. Sources say he spent hours reflecting, not on power, not on legacy, but on the cost of duty. A lifetime spent preparing for a role that, once attained, offered little peace. The crown had come with responsibility, yes, but also isolation, pressure, and a sense that his own humanity had been slowly erased beneath expectation. For years he had endured quietly, smiled when expected, stood tall when burdened. But something within had shifted, not suddenly, but steadily, like a tide that could no longer be held back. Meanwhile, Queen Camilla faced her own emotional reckoning. The shock of the situation had not faded. Instead, it had settled into a deep, aching realization. This was not just about a crown or a title. It was about trust and the fear that it had been fractured beyond repair. Those close to her say, she struggled to reconcile the man she loved with the decision unfolding before her. The silence between them spoke louder than any argument ever could. Years of loyalty, patience, and resilience now felt overshadowed by uncertainty. And yet, despite the pain, she remained composed. Not out of detachment, but strength. She understood that history was moving, with or without her consent. Elsewhere in the palace, Prince William stood at a quiet crossroads of his own. The weight pressing upon him was unlike anything he had ever known. He had been preparing his entire life for leadership, but never under such emotionally fractured circumstances. This was not a ceremonial transition. This was raw, human, complicated. Catherine remained beside him, steady and calm, offering silent reassurance in moments where words failed. She understood the gravity of what was coming, not just for them, but for their children, and for a nation that would soon be watching their every move. The idea that the future could arrive so abruptly left little room for comfort. Behind closed doors, advisors finalized preparations that only days earlier would have seemed unthinkable. Protocols were refined, contingencies revisited, every step calculated with care, knowing history was being shaped in real time. Yet amid all the planning, one truth echoed quietly through the palace. This was not merely a transfer of responsibility. It was the emotional unraveling of a man who had given everything to duty and found himself questioning what remained of his own life. As night fell once more, the palace seemed to hold its breath. Then, quietly, a final decision was set in motion. Not announced, not celebrated, simply accepted. Those closest to the king understood that this was not an act of weakness, but of surrender, a recognition that sometimes the greatest strength lies in knowing when to step back. The future, once distant, now loomed close. What happens next will reshape the monarchy for generations to come. The balance of tradition and humanity will be tested, and the world will soon witness a moment that redefines what leadership truly means. For now, the palace remains silent, but history is already listening. And when the truth finally emerges, it will not arrive with fanfare or spectacle, only with the quiet understanding that everything has changed.